Okay, so I gonna start. So hello everyone, my name is Ronggu and I'm from the University of Tübingen. Today I would like to give a brief introduction of the shapeshifter in Japanese culture. So firstly, I would like to draw your attention on my presentation structure. So the first part is the shapeshifter in early Japanese mythology and literature, followed by shapeshifter in medieval Japanese literature. The third part is the shapeshifter in contemporary Japanese literature, and finally is the shapeshifters in Japanese anime. So now we come to the early Japanese shapeshifter myth. So the shapeshifter is a theme that has a long history. The myth of the shapeshifter is recorded in the natural myths of both Eastern and Western people. Myths that whose main function is and also the natural phenomena of wind, rain, thunder, lightning, and all other changings of seasons and similar pattern. In ancient Greek mythology, for example, as we can see in the image, the phenomenon of the sunflower always facing the sun is interpreted as Helios falling in love with Lacusive and abandon his former love Cleite, who gazed at Helios all day long and eventually becomes a sunflower. But in Japanese mythology, the natural phenomenon of Japanese being covered with green trees and forest is interpreted as Susanoo is recorded as the founder of the Izumo province, turning his hair into countless green trees. He plucked off his long beard, and when the wind blew, he turned into a cedar tree, and his eyebrow turned into a nuber tree. Japan was then covered with precious trees of all kinds and shaded by greenery. However, because of difference in the geographic, historical, social, and ethnic conditions under which the myths of the East and the West were founded, the myths of the Metamorphos and shapeshifter in East and West show different styles in terms of the mode of shapeshifter and the spiritual content of the shapeshifter. Firstly, in terms of the mode, the main mode of the shapeshifter in the Eastern shapeshifter mythology is that, like it's a process of other objects turned into human, which is the opposite of the human into other objects that is constantly happened in the ancient Greek myths. So, for example, in the Western literary tradition, the purely other man mode of the shapeshifter is less common and usually involves in a completely secure structure in which a human being is enchanted into an animal, which is then transformed into a human being again. For example, in Odysseus, he and his companions are described as wandering to a place inhabited by a witch who transformed them into pigs by enchantment and later forced them to return to the human by wisdom. So now the shapeshifters of the objects into human beings is very common throughout Eastern literature, especially in Japanese culture. So the most common sense is that aliens are usually transformed into women, often for the purpose of living together with human males and forming marriage with them. So for example, in the story of the snow woman, as you can see in the image, it's a snow woman. So she is basically made of snow and ice and take on human form. The fact that the snow is white makes the snow woman looks very pale, and her clothes is also purely white and her skin is also white. So in the story, a woodcutter and his son are forced to stay overnight in a cabin in the mountain when they encounter a snowstorm while cutting wood. The hut was empty and the father and the son saw it was safe to stay inside the room. So in the midnight, a beautiful woman, that is the snow woman, in white dress with white skin enters the house. The old woodcutter is instantly turned into ice sculpture when Snow Woman tried to touch him. But when the Snow Woman was back to the young woodcutter and tried to kill him, she suddenly just stopped this sort of thing, and she's just gave a warning to him and says, if you tell anyone about what happened tonight, I will kill you. So after that, she just disappeared into a blizzard. So a few years later, on another snowy night, a beautiful young girl came to the young woodcutter's door and asked him to take her in. So the young woodcutter is very happily to accept and marry the snow maiden. And they have one child, so they have a very happy life. But unfortunately, on another snowy night, the young woodcutter who had been hurt by the snow woman could not forget the nightmare and the horrible sense of his father has been turned into a freedom sculptor. So he told his wife about his very horrible, unique experience. As soon as the young woodcutter said this, his beautiful wife had transformed into the snow woman again and warned the young woodcutter, I warn you back and say I will kill you if you tell this to anyone. But I will max you this time because you are the father of my son. But you have to take care of the son or I will back to kill you. And that is what happened. So basically, the snow woman just disappeared and never be there again. So such a shapeshifter myths are all about animals or like other things like snow and something they hide their true nature and become human beings, usually female, because they want to do such a marriage with the human males. As you can see in the photo, this sort of shapeshifter myth has evolved into a very important genre of non-human wives. It's very, very popular in Japanese folklore, literature, and even today in comics. It can also be seen in some ancient Greek metamorphic mythology. I think most of the shapeshifter were the result of human beings being cursed and punished by the gods for some reason, such as pride, security, and disrespect for the gods, and therefore they have a tragic destination of the shapeshifter in Greek mythology. But in contrast, in the Japanese shapeshifter story, however, the shapeshifter are often for their own free will to change their shape. So the transformation of a human being into an alien, or in contrast, an alien being into a human, is to see more like the transformation simply between different forms of lives, or they constantly they consider the process of transformation as being driven by a strong sense of life for the aim of becoming one with nature that is close without any limitation of lives. So now we come to the next part, which is the medieval Japanese shapeshifter literature. So that is slightly different from the early folklore. In medieval Japanese literature, an example is that a typical Japanese medieval shapeshifter is in the Tales of Moonlight and Rains in Yuda Akinari's story. It focuses on the story of Hinsi, who is a monk from the Midora temple in Hainan period, who suddenly wakes up after a 20-day sleep due to illness and tells his fellow monks that he was so hot and cold in his dreams that he went to swimming in a river outside the temple. He told his colleague that in his dreams he had gone swimming in the river outside the city, and he suddenly felt so happy that he wanted to become a fish. So the river god actually sent someone to turn him into a red crab and instructed him not to swallow bait. And from them he traveled around the rivers and lakes. Later, when he could not stand his hunger, he swallowed the bait of a fisherman. So he knew and then he has been caught. He will then be bought by one of his colleagues and to be made into the fish meat. When Hinsey saw his colleagues eating fish and playing with him, and then he saw the cooker is preparing to kill the fish, then he was like very constantly crying out for help, but all his colleagues just simply ignored him. So finally, just as the cooker is about to chop out the fish head, Hinsey suddenly wakes up from this horrible dream. His dream is obviously a shapeshifter from a human to fish and from fish to human again. So this dream accounts were confirmed by his colleague. So they all say they had seen the fish mouth move, but they cannot hear what Hinsey really said because he was a fish. When they heard Hinsey's dream, they threw away the fish because they were about to, which they were supposed to eat, and they believed they would never eat fish or meat and animal or any animal again. So there are some also similar stories in other medieval ancient cultures, such as the medieval Chinese shapeshifter literature. It's also about humans who has been transformed into fish into dreams. And the events they experience in the dreams are confirmed by what really happened in the real life. So what I feel like is that this story of the shapeshifter that allowed people to experience the suffering of animals being slaughtered, thus urge them not to kill and to cherish life. Of course, this story is also a very subtle portrait of the freedom that humans experience when they become fish, and the fish, the Hinsey, who becomes a fish, swim very freely and happily in the world, reflecting the unlimitations of people who change into animals in nature. I believe that the tales of Moonlight and Rain, which contains the story of the fish, should be seen as an allegorical novel, and its subject matter is that the relationship between the artist and the realistic of life. At the time of writing this work, Hinsey had just lost his family's money in a fire and had broken away from his previous intellectual and literacy trends to face the reality of life for the first time. Such experience and reflection must have been part of his life. The freedom of Hinsey after his transformation shapeshifter into a crab has been seen as a symbol of an artistic freedom, and this is supported by the text of the object. When Hinsey once dreamed of playing with a group of fish while painting, but he had not yet become a fish. The second time he falls asleep and dreams, he becomes a fish and swims freely around the lake, enjoying the indefinite beauty of the landscape, which can be naturally interpreted as a state of complete assimilation with external objects and the disappearance of the boundary of the material and the physical and the spiritual power. This is also an indication that Hinsey's artistic attachments has reached a higher level. There are also those who see the whole dreams of the shapeshifters as the first positive encounter between Hinsey, immersed in the oblivion of art and learning, and the unforgiving reality of life, which is also a more honest and appropriate view. The theme for the tales of Moonlight and Rain is twofold. The first is the realization that the freedom of the fish, although free, is underpinned by a sense of self-control to resist the temptation and protect itself from the lure of the bait. The life of the fish, once a symbol of freedom, is a continuous tango instinct and self-control, which must be overcome in order to achieve the physical freedom and security. Having experienced this firsthand after becoming a fish, Hinsey gained his first insight into the life of fish, which led him to his masterful portrait of the crepe. The pen of Kinsey, on the other hand, experience is the punishment of the Buddha for his own defeat of his instinct. The realization of his own latent weakness meant a deepening of his comprehension as a Buddhist. This interpretation is not without merit, but it is somewhat misinterpreted and tends to apply Buddhism teaching to the work. The basic idea is also to see the shapeshifter as symbolic, but with a slightly different understanding of the symbolism than the previous one. In Tales of Moonlight and Rain, shapeshifter means a hidden design of the human heart, especially for the literati living in the Edda period, where the dreams of shapeshifter may have existed as a hole in the heart. This dream is sublimated in the Tales of Moonlight and Rain for lovers of literature who lived in the representative Togunka and secretly dreamed of the shapeshifter. The story might just be a rescue. The expression is rather subtle, but on reflection, it may be a symbol of freedom, liberation, escape from reality, or a break from the representative reality of life. It is simple, subtle, historical, and easy to accept for this interpretation. So now we come to, generally speaking, medieval Japanese shapeshifter novels were heavily influenced by the literature of Oriental supernatural legends, observing the shapeshifter techniques commonly found in, for example, in ancient Chinese culture, and using characters as clues to develop their plots, and adapting an idealized and extricated style of the shapeshifter fiction. It is an idealized type of the shapeshifter story, which is mainly founded in ancient Japanese novel and influenced the creation of ancient Japanese literature as a whole. After the modern era, with influx of Western literature, the influence of the Eastern literacy canon, especially Chinese literature, diminished, but the tradition of borrowing from the shapeshifter of legend fictions continued, even in the post-World War II literature. The shapeshifter narration in this type of novel, which is systematically pursued an Oriental mystical spirit of enlightenment, retains its artistic style in the tradition of the supernatural and narrative literature, often called in the forms of records and journals in Japanese. So now we come to the shapeshifter in modern Japanese literature. If we come to the modern Japanese fiction, we will find that the shapeshifter in modern Japanese literature are mainly influenced by the shapeshifter techniques of the Western modernists. For example, by the famous Kafka's The Metamorphosis. So with the theme of the alienation of human being in the modern industrial society, the absurdity of the style, the ambiguity and warmth, the blurring of the boundary between human and objects and animals. These metamorphic novels are mainly found into the post-war shapeshifter novels. For example, with Kombo Abe being the most representative author. After the 1960s, Japanese woman literature also observed a great deal of shapeshifter story, and the shapeshifter fiction made a comeback at the height of woman literature in that year. These shapeshifter stories, they combine the shapeshifter stories of the traditional Japanese folklore and the medieval literature, but as well as the feminist perspective of the modern woman. So the themes are often ambiguous and varied, and the style is also full of fantasy. So in the early 20th century, Kafka's metamorphoses were introduced to Japan. And at that time, also together with all this sort of for example, existentialist literature, and had a major impact on Japanese literature. So the Kafka's Shapeshifter is mostly stronger influenced in Abe's theory of the shapeshifter novels, which will be dealt in this section. After 1920, with the rise of the modern Japanese women's literature, Kafka's influence deepened and has been seen in the works of, just name a few famous Japanese women shapeshifter novel writers such as Miyuki Kanai, Hiromi Kawakami, Yoko Tawanda, and others. The whole of the modern Japanese women writers is characterized by their fantasy style, and this is not unrelated to Kafka's influence. Generally speaking, Japanese women writers are heavily influenced by Kafka in their shapeshifter literature, but although they borrowed the techniques of the Kafka's shapeshifter novel, the spiritual core of their works is rooted deeply in the spiritual of the Japanese society. A fantasy that they're portrayed by diving deeply into the depths of reality with their unique female sensibility. This gives them a different spirit from Kafka's shapeshifter. Yoko Tawanda, for example, she was a long-time resident of Germany and is a well-known Japanese author who has been active abroad in recent years. Her motivation for writing is different from other writers and is purely a matter of deep thinking about Japanese language. It was through her work in German that she came to recognize some of the important quality of the Japanese language, which led her to study the language and, as a result, to pay particular attention to folk tales. She used the framework or the theme of the folk tales in many of her novels. For example, there is one novel called The Mask of the Crane, which shines at the night, which invokes the Christian legend of the Virgin and the Japanese legend of the Urahima, as well as the Grimm's tale. The Mask of the Crane, which shines at night, invokes the is mainly like shapeshifter stories, which makes use of the shapeshifter from the Japanese folklore, but also explores the issue of woman, family, marriage in modern Japanese society. Also, in the masterpiece, The Bridgetown Was a Dew, which explored the snake son-in-law of the past in Japanese folklore. It is a modern interpretation of the Japanese folktale of the snake son-in-law, giving the work a triple structure, and in the superposition and reflection of the triple structure, it metaphorically expressed a deepened reflection of the existence of contemporary Japanese woman and the sense of absurdity of the marriage. So it's very ironic. So now, in contemporary Japanese literature, many writers like to use the subject of the shapeshifter to express the horror and absurdity of reality. In post-war Japanese literature, where popular literature is flourished and pure literature is declining, Kobo Abe stands out as one of the writers who have turned their attention in the chaotic reality of Japan and reflected a key sense of human existence. He used a series of shapeshifters to express his active concern for human existence, turning people into walls, cocoons, ghosts, roads, floods, etc., etc. Because of this reality, obviously, it is very apparently the shapeshifter. Kobo Abe's work has often been accused of imitating Kafka. But I think Kobo's work has often, like, I believe an analysis of the difference between his work and Kafka is a very important producer to interpret the uniqueness of his work in the whole Japanese literary history. So firstly, let us look at the theoretical basis for Kobo Abe's use of the shapeshifter. So his use of the human shapeshifter was influenced by Kafka, obviously, but on the other hand, also by the post-war movement, the post-war avant-garde movement in Japan. The cornerstone of the post-war movement in Japan was the Night Society, founded in 1948, which include, for example, Kobo Yusabe, Taro Okamoto, Yutaka Haniya, and others. The two most important points are the unity of the opposite in opposing forms and the unity of the external and the internal. For example, the reality and sensibility, which is the basis of Abe's shapeshifter story. It can be said that Abe's shapeshifter works are the literary practice of such an avant-garde art theory. Firstly, the unification of opposite in the optical forms refers to the unification of things that are different in nature and cannot coexist in the same place, thus achieving an attack on the unreasonable norms of the real world. The metamorphic works of Abe are also about the transformation of humans into plants, walls, and snows, and other unthinkable objects, which give people a psychological shock and inspire them to think about the irrationality of the existential situation. Secondly, the unity of the external and the internal can be interpreted as like the real and the sensual, means that the inner world of human is only a reflection of the external world, and that the true nature of the inner world of man can never be discovered without a confrontation between the internal abstraction and the external concrete thing. So in other words, the essence of the inner world is discovered through a circular movement from outside to the inside and back again, materializing the inner thoughts of human beings. So now, if we was to discuss one of the masterpieces from Abe is called The Flood. It is published in 1950, and also The Life of the Point, which is published in 1952. So in these two works, the human shapeshifter takes on a new power. The flood depicts is like the representation of the working people, the working class, who is very poor and is at the bottom of the society. So such a flood gives them the power. So they becomes the flood, and they have the power to control water at their will, to stop machines, to cause some small floods, and even to disrupt society. And this is particular true of the rich who suffer from the flood. The rich can draw in a cup of coffee, a glass of whiskey, or even a drop of airdropper water. Eventually, the whole world is submerged. At the end of the text, under the quiet water, a shimmering new substance began to crystallize, centered on the heart of the liquefied man, the original poor man. So this is signaling a new birth. What happens in the flood is that a collective shapeshifter has the power to turn the world upside down. At the same time, this sort of the group, the collective shapeshifter, has the potential for regeneration. It is a story of the destruction and the rebirth of the whole world. So if we come to the topic of the life of the poet. So it has been written in 1942. So it's about a further development of the flood. It involving both the individual shapeshifter and the collective shapeshifter. The main character is the son of a 31-year-old woman who was fired for pointing out the misconduct in a factory and has since been handed out leaflets to awaken the rebellion of other works. The work begins with the shapeshifter of the 29-year-old woman, who, like the previous individual shapeshifter, suddenly realizes the pointlessness of her forced labor as her spins her young. Only this time the shapeshifter is not repeated, as the old woman is immediately transformed into wool, who is then being knitted into a jumper and put into a storage because no one buys it. It is then depicted that people are left with empty skins because of poverty, while their dreams, thoughts, and aspirations evaporate into clouds and then cool down into snow, which finally frees the whole world. It is a drop of blood from the old woman that turns into a jumper that saves the world, and it melts the son who is running for the revolutionary cause and makes him realize his own nature as a poet. It is also a story of a world broken and reborn. It portrays the emptiness of poverty and the power of the working man to create a new world once he awakens. So in general, we can see the difference in focus between Abe and Kafka in terms of shapeshifter. Kafka is focused more on the transformed human beings, on the conflict between human and animal nature, and on the conflict between human beings and the world around them. It is the alienation of man under the weight of the modern societies and the modern social system. However, in contrast, Abe, he focused more on the meticulous depiction of the process of the metamorphosis, aiming to show the dismemberment and fragmentation of man through the process of the shapeshifter. In Kafka's world of shapeshifter, the shapeshifter subjects are almost very ugly, mean animals such as the beetles, rats, monkeys, etc., etc., and they are represented as beings with negative human values in order to represent the human experience of existence. However, in Abe's shapeshifter world, the shapeshifter images are invariably living or inanimate, inorganic objects such as roads, ghosts, cocoons, walls, floods, etc. By means of extreme shapeshifter, Abe conveys a sense of abstraction that transcends concrete reality, generating rich realistic association from abstract shapeshifter image. Abe's ability to transpose biblical mythology into the narrative text of his shapeshifter novels, parodying the narrative pattern of the mythological stories, symbolically represents the weakness and of the modern people. So now we come to the most excited part. Is the shapeshifters in Japanese anime. So the most common form of the transformation in contemporary Japanese anime is the whole body. As you can see in the photo, there are many examples in Miyazaki's work, such as the Chihiro Ogino's parents. They are transformed into pigs due to their gluttony in Spirited Away, and the little white dragon transformed between human and dragon. In Poyo on the Cliff, Poyo is transformed from a goldfish into a man. And in Howard's Moving Castle, Howard is transformed into a large bird with the dark blue feathers. So now we come to, I will call it is the origin of the shapeshifter animes in Japanese. So in 1972, one of the manga artists, his name is Naga. He created his masterpiece Devilman, which tells the story of the young man whose name is Fudomaki, who gains demonic powers and fights 2 days and to protect the humanity from a race of demons. So the story of this Fudomaki, who fights on the days to protect the human from the demon, was adapted later by the Devilman Crybaby. So the Devilman was the first of its kind of his race to feature a fight between humans and non-humans, followed by new and unknown species such as giants. The new species are usually born from the human mutation and are the enemies of the humans. They are also not accepted by the human society. So the role of the protagonist is normally like they act as like the bridge who connect the human and non-human. And his task is to like try to fight, but after the fighting, he always attempts to end the struggle and get in peace. So as we can see here, so there are several examples of the shapeshifters. So this one is very famous. So there are more specific form of the shapeshifter in Hetalia. So it's the first example here. So as displayed in the photo, Hetalia, it took the history of the world before and after the Second World War as the backdrop from the shapeshifter changed the countries into human. It's a sort of the anthropomorphing. It anthropomorphizes the image of the countries concerned and giving them a very unique and representative character for each people. For example, the United States is portrayed as a very cheerful, energetic, young, blonde, an absolute ego hero who likes burger, cola, and fries. But the French is like into a figure that is very fancy with luxuries and always has a glass of wines or a rose in his hand, while the Chinese figure is a ponytail teenager of more than 400 years age with a scar on his back from a Japanese cut. So also here, Sales at the Work is another very famous example. While the author created vivid and realistic human figure of cell, cheese, and virus in the human body, such as the white cells that are white and kill germs, and virus crisply, red cells that run around and deliver oxygen to virus part of the body, and platelet that appears in the group as children. So as you can see in the photo, there is also here the communal friends with this sort of all sorts of the anthropomorphic animals, land of the lustrous with its gems, the Kenta collection with its battleship, and the Tokorambu with its weapons. Given the double-layered nature of the construction of meaning in this all sort of the shapeshifter characters, they are a common subject of the homoerotic creation in the current era of the self-published content. Such a shapeshifter of the characters as a special form of the manipulation is often seen in the secondary creation of fancies. The consumption of such work is based on common space of meaning shared by a common contextual audience. And in the case of the Orthomorphic character creation, the fact of the realistic worldview to which the orthomorphic character refers no longer needs to be specifically identified, makes it possible for the audience to get the reflection of the realistic worldview to which this refer no longer needs to be specifically labeled, makes it easy for audience to engage with the characters. In conclusion, although this orthomorphism in Japanese anime appears on the surface to be a representative practice of the objectifying human in terms of consumption, it is a postmodern consumer practice of the objectification of the human. It is not just a development in rhetorical device and narrative imagination, but a necessity in the current culture of the industrial age. On the other hand, I think such a shapeshifter in anime works assumes so many intrinsic meaning that the creators use various shapeshifter methods to reflect their understanding and perception of the objective world, and to convey their human attitude and emotional sense. However, there is a big question mark as to whether this inner meaning will be received by readers and audience. The anime industry, like other entertainment industries such as film and television, is ultimately governed by the commercial market. And while the quality of the work is important, the ability to produce mass quantity anime is also essential for the industry to be profitable and to gain economic benefits. A successful and popular anime is quickly typecast with everything from the character in the plot, the scene, the narrative structure, and they are sort of dismantled and reassembled into a certain pieces, and they put it into massive production. The mature industrial chain has produced a steady stream of such an anime industry, but few of the best works has really a deeper meaning of the shapeshifter. Sorry. I think I still need to show the conclusion page. Okay, so here we reach the end. What we can conclude is that basically shapeshifter is a constant popular theme in Japanese culture. Shapeshifter in early Japanese folklore are transferred from the objects or animals to humans, and most of them are female characters pursuing marriage with human males, such as Snow Woman and Crane Wife. But if we move later to the pre-modern medieval Edo period, shapeshifters may change from human into various motifs such as crab, rabbit, stone, snake, etc., but can also be partially transformed with intrinsic nature and species unchanged. Unlike shapeshifter in Western literature are derived from punishment and curse with tragic narration, shapeshifter in Japanese culture are seen more than a pure transformation of human life into another life form. For example, Tales of Moonlight and Rain, we talked before, they depict the monk who becomes a fish and swims leisurely in the water, suggesting the uniting with nature and breaking the limitation of human existence and seeking lasting freedom. So shapeshifter, we move to it's in the contemporary Japanese literature. It often moves freely between the humans and animals and have multi-dimensional implications. For example, as what we talked for the collective shapeshifter, it has the power to destruct the world and give it a rebirth. In Kawakami's work, shapeshifters experience an animal world that is warmer than human reality. Conversely, some female writer's work is influenced by Kafka's Metamorphoses, and it formed the psychological depiction of human nature and the absurdity of human fate. Later, the virtual technology in Japanese anime grants a chance to broaden the expression in shapeshifter themes, including cyborgs, parasitic beasts, and the most famous anthropomorphic drawing of the non-human objects, such as countries like the gyms and the weapons, stuff like that. With their diverse perspective of shapeshifter position, Shapeshifter critically examined the current human and technological society and expressed complex emotions like fear, confusion, artistic values, and expressions of heroism. Okay. So that is all for today, my presentation, and thank you for listening.